So I don't know if you guys saw this news, but apparently Donald Trump's campaign is giving pieces of the suit that he wore during his debate this summer with Joe Biden to fans who spend a lot of money on digital trading cards. And so I just have so many questions about people essentially purchasing pieces of a suit.
Has he worn it since?
That's a good question
too.
He's calling it a knockout suit.
How many pieces do you divide the suit into, and how do you price the pieces? Like, is the tie worth more than the shirt, or, or the jacket maybe is the premium? And can you buy the entire jacket, or is it only cut up into pieces?
Yasmeen's already jumping into, like, how do we actually actualize this?
How do you market this?
How do you market this? Welcome to the Campaign Moment on this Friday, August 30th. I'm Elahe Izadi, co-host of Post Reports.
And I'm Aaron Blake, senior political reporter and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. We're also joined this week by White House reporter for The Post, Yasmeen Abutaleb. Hey, Yasmeen.
Hi, thanks for having me this week.
We're going to be talking about Vice President Kamala Harris's interview on CNN Thursday night. And this was perceived as a big moment for Harris. And also later, we're going to get into the latest from the Trump campaign, including what the Republican nominee has been saying about abortion and IVF.
I also wanted to talk about some other news out of the Trump campaign this week, in particular, a confrontation that took place on Monday at Arlington National Cemetery, where defense officials and the cemetery say the Trump campaign got in a physical altercation with a worker there who was trying to prevent them from taking video and photos of a sensitive area.
And so before we get to all that, I did want to start with the interview with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor, and her running mate. Yasmeen, I know that you cover Harris at the White House for The Post, and also you were up watching this interview Thursday night that she did. She sat alongside Minnesota governor and her running mate, Tim Walz, and they both spoke to CNN's Dana Bash. There was a lot of hype in the lead up to this interview. So let's just talk about why, Yasmeen. Why did this interview matter so much, and what did Harris have to do here?
Well, obviously, the circumstances of this race have been so unusual and unprecedented. So she's only been in the race for about 5 weeks now, but in that time had not done a sit-down interview. So she's obviously had this pretty crazy momentum behind her campaign. And then she was starting to face some scrutiny, I think, especially as the Democratic National Convention approached, that she had not actually been in an unscripted setting since she had become the presidential nominee. So that, obviously she was good on the stump, she was electrifying crowds, but could she actually answer questions where she wasn't reading a prepared speech, or it wasn't a sort of informal setting with voters, sort of hard-hitting questions. And I think there were some key questions that she had to answer that Dana Bash did ask her pretty much right off the bat about why she's had some pretty dramatic changes in her policy positions since she launched her first presidential campaign in 2019. And I think there are a lot of questions about exactly what type of president she would be. What would she do? Is she going to break with Biden anywhere? It's sort of a tricky situation because she is his sitting vice president and he's still the president. So she wants to thread that needle carefully. But I think there are questions about who she is and who her political identity is now.
And Aaron, what do you think Harris had to do here?
I mean, there was a real question about whether Harris could kind of live up to the hype. We've seen with Joe Biden that delivering a speech is not the same as doing an interview, is not the same as debating. Democrats are ebullient right now. Like, there was a poll this week that showed their enthusiasm levels are higher than at any point since 2008 with Barack Obama, and in a lot of cases higher than it generally was when Obama was running in 2008 and 2012. Like, Democrats are really hyped about this. But we also have in Harris a vice president who was not popular and has not been popular until recently. She has been ridiculed as giving kind of meandering and weird answers when she's given previous speeches and done interviews. And so there's a question about, like, can she live up to this? Can she carry the torch forward? Can she pass these tests? And so there's a lot of kind of Democrats kind of downplaying the significance of this interview, but answering questions on your feet and withstanding scrutiny of some of these big issues that came up in this interview was a really big test for her.
Mm-hmm. At the beginning, Bash repeatedly asked Harris about policies that she backed when she was in the Democratic primary, back during the 2020 election cycle. And this was before she was picked as Biden's VP candidate. So there was a particularly interesting exchange about fracking. Let's take a listen to that.
Fracking, as you know, is a pretty big issue, particularly in your must-win state of Pennsylvania.
Sure.
Do you still want to ban fracking?
No, and I made that clear on the debate stage in 2020, that I would not ban fracking. As vice president, I did not ban fracking. As president, I will not ban fracking.
In 2019, I believe, in a town hall, you said you were asked, would you commit to implementing a federal ban on fracking on your first day in office? And you said, there's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So yes. So it changed in that campaign?
In 2020, I made very clear where I stand. We are in 2024, and I've not changed that position, nor will I going forward. I kept my word, and I will keep my word.
What made you change that position at the time?
Well, let's be clear. My values have not changed.
So, Yasmeen, what do you make of how she handled that?
Well, clearly they prepped that answer because they knew she would be asked about it. I thought it was interesting that she fully owned this is not her position. She wasn't wishy-washy about it, didn't try to take some middle ground. But she also sort of tried to argue that her position didn't change, in that she said her values haven't changed. So I thought it was sort of an interesting approach to try to say, yes, her position's changed, but she's still fundamentally the same person.
Erin, did that work? I'm wondering, often candidates, one of the go-tos is well, I've evolved. It's not that I flip-flop. One man's flip-flop is another man's evolution. Does this work?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because Dana Bash actually kind of volunteered a couple options for Harris. Basically, have you changed your position because you've gotten more information, or have you changed your position because you didn't really believe these things in the first place and you were running in a Democratic primary? And Harris didn't really grant either of those premises, but she kind of suggested it was more the former. She was saying that these her priorities are similar, but she's using different tools. So I don't know that this is necessarily going to make these issues go away in the way that she wants them to, because there wasn't a whole lot of clarity on why she's not talking about these things like she used to.
Well, Erin, Yasmeen's point about her hewing so much to Joe Biden's presidency, were there any moments in that space that really stood out to you that really illustrated that for you?
Yeah, she really walked a fine line on this. She's been doing that for a while. She's kind of tried to run as the change candidate while, obviously she's been a high-ranking person in the administration for the last 3.5 years. I thought it was really striking some of the language she used. On 2 occasions, she referred to, quote, a new way forward.
I think that people are ready for a new way forward. In a way that generations of Americans have been fueled by hope and by optimism.
On 2 other occasions, she basically suggested that we need to move on from, quote, the last decade.
And so, one, I am so proud to have served as vice president to Joe Biden. And 2, I am so proud to be running with Tim Walz for president of the United States and to bring America what I believe the American people deserve, which is a new way forward, and turn the page on the last decade of what I believe has been contrary to where the spirit of our country really lies.
And Dana Bash noted, the last decade includes 3.5 years of the Biden administration. That includes time in which you've been a member of that administration. You've had a powerful perch to try and enact some of these policies that you're pushing. And Harris, she didn't criticize the Biden administration, but she did kind of set it up as the Biden administration was pulling us out of an economic recovery and righting the ship. And now I can do more things that people are going to like, basically. Like almost like the Biden administration is a first step, and then now is the opportunity to do some real things, which is really interesting because it's kind of difficult to square that with the idea that the Biden administration has been a resounding success. It's like we got out of a hole here, but she also kind of pitched it as being transformative. So it really kind of speaks to the tension here, which is like, how much does she embrace the things that have happened on the Biden administration, which is not a popular administration? And how does she square that with the fact that she's been there and she owns some of these results?
So there's actually a moment that really illustrates this, I think. Let's take a listen.
You have been vice president for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
The steps that you're talking about now, why haven't you done them already?
Well, first of all, we had to recover as an economy, and we have done that. I'm very proud of the work that we have done that has brought inflation down to less than 3%. The work that we have done to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors. Donald Trump said he was going to do a number of things, including allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. Never happened. We did it.
This is certainly a difficult kind of balancing act for her. Like, people want the change candidate, but they also, will look at her as a member of the Biden administration. And she doesn't want to go too hard against the things that have happened over the last 3.5 years because she does have loyalty to Biden. But I was really interested this week because I looked up some numbers on this. I wanted to see, are people differentiating her from the Biden administration that they don't like? And it seems like they kind of are. There was a Washington Post, ABC News, Ipsos poll that asked how much people perceived her as having real influence over the Biden administration's policies on the economy and immigration. And I was surprised by how few people thought that she really played a central role in those. Clear majorities of people, around 6 in 10, thought that she only had some influence or less on these really key policy areas. And so I think you begin to see why people might look at her and think that she is different. Whether that's going to hold up over time is a really big question.
Another moment that really stood out to me, Yasmeen, and I'm really curious on your take on this as someone who has been covering the vice president, was when Bash asked Harris directly about some of the recent attacks Trump has made about her identity. So let's take a listen to that.
He suggested that you happened to turn black recently for political purposes, questioning a core part of your identity.
Yeah.
Any?
Same old tired playbook. Next question, please.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay.
Yasmeen, that stood out to me because she's basically like, I do not want to engage with this. Let's move on. Is that in line with what you know about Harris and how she talks about identity?
Yeah, our colleague Maeve Reston wrote this story last week about how Hillary Clinton had run very much as the first woman who would become president, breaking the ultimate glass ceiling. Harris has not done any of that. She, in her convention speech and her stump speeches, she never talks about being the first woman to be president. She never talks about being the first Black woman to be president or South Asian American woman to be president. She doesn't want her campaign to be about that. And later, when she's asked about this picture that went viral, it's the back of her niece's head with these two braids watching Kamala Harris accept the nomination, and it went viral because it just spoke to the history of the moment. Harris was asked about it, and she spoke about it in this almost clinical way. It's like she did not talk about the emotion behind it or what it meant to her or what it meant to her and her family. She just said, she sort of described it. She was like, yeah, you see her there with the two little braids, and then there I am.
You're right. It's the back of her head, her two little braids, and then I'm in the front of the photograph, obviously speaking. And it's very humbling. It's very humbling in many ways.
She does not want this to be her campaign. And she says, I'm the best person for the job. And I think that's the point she's trying to make, that it doesn't matter what her racial or ethnic background is. It doesn't matter what her gender is. She's trying to say, none of that matters. She is the best person to run for president.
Well, what's the calculation there? Is it that she doesn't have to say it because it's so obvious? Is it that other people are saying it for her so she doesn't, I guess, what is the calculation there? Like, it didn't work for Hillary Clinton, so let's not have you talk about it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of all of the above. Like, Democrats are kind of still stung by what happened in 2016, although I'm not sure Hillary Clinton playing up her status as the potential first female president was her biggest liability, to the extent it was a liability. Like, Democrats are just concerned about the fact that it might be. And also, like, she doesn't have to say these things herself. Like, other people know what the deal is. And so I think that she is focused on kind of building up her candidacy in other ways and focusing on her appeal to things that just aren't about her identity, and knowing that people kind of understand those things, just generally speaking.
So like we said, there was a lot of hype in the lead up to this interview. Did she accomplish what she needed to do here? What do you guys think? How would you rate it?
I think her team will probably believe it's a success. She didn't have any major stumbles. I don't think there's anything that she said that she would regret, or in their view would be sort of picked apart in a way that would cast doubt on the type of campaign she's trying to run. I do think the ongoing question, though, is obviously she's got this debate against Trump in less than 2 weeks, and she is going to come under pressure to do many more of these media interviews. Like, doing one nearly 30-minute interview with Tim Walz is not going to suffice for the next 2 months.
Yeah, and we should say Tim Walz was there. He was asked a few questions, but it was mostly the focus. Well, and Walz was there, but the focus was mostly on Harris. Aaron, did she do what she needed to do? And also, I'm like, who is the audience for this interview?
Yeah, I don't think that major news was made in this. I think for the Harris campaign, it was a lot about checking a box, understanding that this was going to be the first kind of major moment when it comes to answering questions, and a lot of eyes were on them, and they needed to make sure that they got through it and dealt with some of these questions that have been looming over their campaign. I don't know that, her explanations of, her changing positions provided a whole ton of clarity. I don't know that Tim Walz's answers about inaccuracies that he and his campaign had put forward about.
He said he had bad grammar. Yeah,
he said he had bad grammar. His family's use of fertility treatments, his past campaign's inaccurate recounting of his DUI arrest in the 1990s. He tried to pitch it as him being candid, but also sometimes he makes mistakes and then he owns them. So I think these are going to loom a little bit longer, but the stakes in future interviews are going to be lower. I think the real question is kind of what this says about her ability to debate Trump and how much she reassured Democrats about her ability to do that, especially since Democrats just a month and a half ago went through that Biden-Trump debate.
Now
they're going to be nervous. Yeah, they're going to be nervous going into this, even if they have confidence in her, because they know the stakes. They've seen the stakes of that debate. And so I think that this interview won't last too long in the memory, but it was kind of an early proving ground.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get into Trump's recent comments on abortion and a confrontation at Arlington National Cemetery involving his campaign. We'll be right back. So let's talk about something that the Trump campaign is getting a lot of attention for. Earlier this week, former President Donald Trump, he went to Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia to commemorate the 3rd anniversary of a suicide bombing that killed 13 American service members. And this was during the chaotic 2021 Afghanistan withdrawal. He's really criticized President Joe Biden for his handling of that withdrawal. But anyway, while Trump and his campaign were at the cemetery, NPR reported that his staff got into an altercation with an employee at the cemetery who was trying to enforce a rule that no photos or videos can be taken near the graves of soldiers who recently died. This is an area known as Section 60. Aaron, can you tell us more about what has happened since then?
Yeah, so the crux of the matter is that under federal law, you are not supposed to take part in, quote, partisan political activities at Arlington National Cemetery. And the Trump campaign went on to use footage of this event from this sensitive area. This is an area where recently deceased service members are buried. So these are not, World War I, World War II. These are like Afghanistan, Iraq veterans who are buried there. And so it's a very sensitive subject. And according to the cemetery, according to defense officials, the Trump campaign basically kind of bulldozed their way through and decided to do this. They used them while attacking the Biden administration for the Afghanistan withdrawal. And I should add that the Trump campaign kind of downplayed the idea of a physical altercation, but it basically acknowledged that there was some kind of a confrontation. They've criticized the cemetery for talking about this and saying what happened. They've really taken this head on, and it really kind of raises issues of like sensitivities to these very sensitive and hallowed areas. Like, it's one thing to visit these and memorialize people. It's another thing to use these in a campaign context. And what we know about this event suggests that the Trump campaign was pretty intent upon using this politically in the 2024 campaign, which at the very least runs afoul of the spirit of the law. And I think the experts I talked to suggest that it does actually violate this federal law, which bans partisan political activities in this area of the cemetery.
Well, it also sounds like officials have said that they consider the matter closed because the cemetery worker decided not to press charges. So even if, you're saying it does seem to run afoul of the law, I'm not clear that there will be any consequence to that. But Aaron, you did also recently write about how this episode fits into a broader trend that we've seen from Trump of how he talks about the military or interacts with memorials. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Trump, from the very earliest days of his presidency, has really blurred the lines between military and memorials and political. He went to the CIA on his first full day as president and stood in front of a wall that commemorates more than 100 CIA service members who died in the line of service and delivered a very political kind of rambling speech. He made similar remarks when he visited the Pentagon shortly thereafter. He blamed the judiciary and the media for potential future terrorist attacks when visiting an Air Force base in Tampa in February of 2017. During phone calls with service members, he would attack Democrats and previous administrations and federal judges. His first visit to Iraq, he talked about how Democrats were not funding his border wall. And so there's a lot of stuff here. There's a lot of examples here. Yeah. And I'm running through the laundry list here. Yeah. This isn't in a vacuum, this confrontation. Trump has been criticized before for not respecting these lines between being the commander-in-chief who is kind of nonpartisan military. And so this kind of is an even bigger example of it.
Yasmeen, I'm wondering how the Harris campaign is dealing with this, because it sounds like in the pushback, in the light of criticism of the Trump campaign doing this, we're hearing a lot of, well, really what you guys really need to be talking about is how Joe Biden and Kamala Harris botched the withdrawal of Afghanistan. How is the Harris campaign seizing on this moment?
I think they're using it to highlight basically the litany of examples Aaron laid out before of Trump disrespecting service members. We know that for Biden, especially because his son was a former military member, that he used to highlight this a lot as well, the way Trump disrespected Americans who served. And I also think, obviously, Trump was going to Arlington National Cemetery to try to highlight the 13 service members who died. But it seems like that all got lost in the drama of the altercation. And so it provides the Harris campaign a way to sort of detract from what Trump was doing, which was to try to highlight what they call a major failure of the Biden and Harris administration and instead point to Trump's disrespect. And not only that, Trump and his senior aides are really doubling down. Like, they have not backed off at all, even after the Army issued a statement defending their employee at Arlington National Cemetery. So I feel like now the story's more about the altercation than it was about the initial point the Trump campaign was trying to make.
Well, before we sign off, I did want to get to one other thing that came out of the Trump campaign this week. And this is when Trump spoke about abortion and IVF. And he's speaking about it in ways maybe we haven't heard him speak about before. Aaron, briefly, can you just tell me what he said and what stood out to you about it?
Yes, so on Thursday, Trump was asked about the Florida ballot measure, which would enshrine abortion rights into the state constitution. This is obviously a big thing because Florida has a 6-week abortion ban, and it's been set for the ballot for 5 months, but Trump hasn't taken a position. He again criticized the 6-week abortion ban, but he didn't really take a position on this specific ballot measure, which would expand abortion rights way beyond 6 weeks. The other key thing that he said on Thursday was he debuted a proposal that would make the government essentially pay for IVF services. And this creates real potential tensions, I think, that have existed kind of beneath the surface between him and the anti-abortion movement. Like, he's been moving away from these more hardline positions on abortion. And here he is talking about the government funding a procedure, IVF, which creates embryos, many of which are not ultimately used. And a lot of these kind of more hardline elements regard those creation of embryos, and if you destroy them later or if you don't use them, they regard that as life. And so the idea that the government would be getting involved in creating a life that isn't actually resulting in a pregnancy and resulting in a birth is a pretty remarkable statement from a Republican presidential candidate. And so I'm really interested in how these kind of anti-abortion true believers are going to take him kind of continually moving away from them on these kinds of issues.
Yasmeen, I'm so curious how that proposal, whether it's, we don't know very much about it, but this idea that Trump is saying the government will help pay for IVF, how is that going to work in a matchup against Harris? Because abortion access and also IVF and fertility have featured like such big campaign themes for the Harris-Walz campaign.
I think it's actually not that hard for them because Trump has waffled on this issue for the entire campaign. He takes credit for overturning Roe v. Wade, and then he disavows state abortion bans. Like, he's gone back and forth on this a number of times, and I imagine he will continue to until Election Day. So basically, the Harris campaign strategy for this has been to just keep, like on their Twitter account, on their various social media accounts, as they keep playing clips of Trump taking credit for overturning Roe v. Wade, supporting a national abortion ban. Like, they're basically trying to tell voters, don't believe what he's saying right now. This is what he actually stands for. And then the other thing is that J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, is very much against abortion, and he's had some sort of more extreme statements. He voted against an IVF bill in the Senate. And so even if Trump goes back and forth, they can also keep highlighting what Vance has said and what he continues to say. So I think that's going to be their strategy. I don't think they're that thrown anymore when Trump changes his position. And the other thing about this proposal that the government would pay for IVF, he did not explain at all how that would happen. Even a lot of insurers don't cover IVF right now.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much, Yasmeen.
Thank you.
And thank you, Aaron. See you next week.
Thank you. And make sure you're subscribing, of course, to the Campaign Moment newsletter. You can find a link to that in our show notes and at postreports.com.
Yasmeen Abutaleb is a White House reporter for The Post, and Aaron Blake is a senior political reporter. That's it for this week on the Campaign Moment. Now, if you're listening to us via Post Reports, we will keep bringing you these conversations most Fridays. But I want to tell you about why you should follow the Campaign Moment show feed itself, because Aaron and our other colleagues are going to be dropping other episodes and continuing to cover politics during the week on the Campaign Moment.
That's right. We're going to be having these exclusive episodes every week between now and Election Day. So be sure to look that up wherever you're listening. Today's episode was produced by Laura Benshoff and mixed by Sean Carter. It was edited by Lucy Perkins and Ariel Plotnick.
Our team also includes Maggie Penman, Rena Flores, Monica Campbell, Ted Muldoon, Alana Gordon, Rennie Svirnovsky, Bishop Sand, Sabby Robinson, Emma Talkoff, Peter Bresnan, Ali Bianco, Allison Michaels, Renita Jablonski, and Martine Powers. I'm Elahe Izadi. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.